What I've noticed with winners is like they will win once doing one thing and then they become winners. They just learn how to win.
Antonio Lombardo is a serial entrepreneur starting 7 businesses in the last 15 years.
Starting a modest college painting company,
to now owning a suite of profitable businesses ranging from a successful real estate brokerage, property management and insurance companies, as well as managing his highly lucrative crypto treasury.
all built from the ground up through utilizing grassroots strategies such as cold calling, door knocking, and building rapport with clients.
And every no, every rejection is just one more closer to that yes. It's excruciatingly hard, but the barrier to entry is very, very low. So like there's little subtle things you do that you sabotage yourself. I think we made like 40 or 50,000 bucks in 4 months, like 4 or 5 months. It's a short season in Michigan. And to be honest, the hardest part about starting a business, there's the operations side, which is tough, but there's nothing until you generate revenue.
So I'm sure some people are asking the question, like, why would someone spend 30 years building a book of business and then why would they sell it to you?
Burnout. I'm 38 years old and I feel it now. And that's what fiat means by declaration. So we're all playing this game of, okay, the money's worth something because, but there's nothing fundamentally behind it.
What's your long-term investment strategy?
My long-term investment strategy is to
Hey guys, James Danley. Welcome to the Bulldogs podcast. Today we have a very special guest for you, a good friend of mine and a serial entrepreneur, Antonio Lombardo. This guy has started over 7 businesses over the last 15 years, and he's built an entire life around entrepreneurship. So for any of those of you that are interested in the entrepreneurial life, that's what today's episode is going to be about. A man that's never really worked for anybody else. He's just started a lot of businesses. Antonio, great to have you with us, brother.
It's a great introduction. Thanks for having me today.
So let's start at the beginning, man. I want people to hear some of your life story and kind of like where you've come from. And to give you guys like an overview, Antonio was born and raised in Michigan, started a bunch of businesses, and we're talking about businesses in real estate development, real estate investment, brokerage, sales, mortgage, insurance, property management, and crypto sectors. So he's built a lot of real estate-based businesses and some other investment companies in other areas as well. Also moved his entire family to Florida and has made a lot of other interesting transitions throughout his life. So it's a cool journey story. So let's go back to the beginning, man. Where were you raised? What was your upbringing like?
So I was born and raised here in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Went to Andover High School. When I was younger, I had an upper middle class upbringing. It was a great life, awesome family. I have a younger sister, an older half sister, mom and dad that loved each other. But like a lot of families, we went through divorce. And in that process, my father was a real estate developer too, a home builder, and owned and ran a heating and air conditioning business. But after the divorce, it was one of those drawn out, nasty divorces, and our family ended up falling into poverty. So we were on welfare. I had like no direction in my life. My dad ended up moving to Florida. So it was kind of a tough time where I had to fend for myself and kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life without a lot of direction at that time. So the general upbringing was really positive and a firm foundation. The great thing is looking back now, like the chapter of distress and fighting uphill battles is what built my character. It gave me strength. Before that, even though we were in a very comfortable financial situation, I had to go to therapy as a kid. I had, self-awareness, like kind of issues, and just fought with like depression a little bit, like some kind of mild depression when I was younger. So I would say what defines me in my background is really the tough chapters.
I think that's something that a lot of people can identify with, especially in modern America. I mean, the majority of households, at least half of them, end up in divorce, and it does affect the kids depending on the ages. What I think is really interesting is the fact that your dad was kind of this, had an entrepreneurial career, and like that kind of fell apart with the market collapse, and you guys ended up broke through that in the divorce process. And yet, in the end of the day, you ended up like choosing to go and like live the path of the entrepreneur, right? And they take that adventurous journey where everything has to be created, everything's built from scratch. There's no safety net. Instead of going the corporate route and taking like a steady job. And in my opinion, you're a man that's gifted in finance and management. You have all these skill sets with regards to how you deal with people and your communication skills, and you can sell. But it's incredible that you chose that path after like what you experienced growing up. Talk to me about that a little bit. Like, why do you think that is? You made that decision.
That's true. I don't think about that very often, and I wonder how much of our lives are hardwired, like either in DNA and our upbringing, or maybe just observed from our parents and from our mentors and people that we are surrounded by. My father always woke up really early. He was up at like 4:30 or 5 a.m. I woke up with him. I remember him singing in the shower, like just always got an early start. He worked late, put in a lot of hours. If he was sick, he still went to work and would just grind all day, like no time off. Like he just was an entrepreneur. He was built for it. I didn't think I was going to go that route. I was more of an IT tech kid when I was younger, built servers. I did some coding and thought I would go work in maybe the software industry or do a startup. And then I was aimless in high school after that divorce and when things were just completely off kilter. So at that time, I didn't even want to go to college. I didn't have any plans to go to university, although I did. I ended up going to Michigan State University, mostly just because I had a couple of friends going there. And to be honest, I was aimless. Like, even during the university years, I changed degrees like 6 different times. I wanted to go into finance or banking, but never expected to start my own business. What actually pushed me into entrepreneurship were two things. One is when I graduated, it was 2009, a really horrible time to go into banking. And so I think I may have maybe had those, seeds planted from my dad at a young age. I had other family members that were entrepreneurs too. But I was really shoved into it. So like I couldn't get an unpaid internship in Chicago or New York. Like nobody was hiring. The banks were literally melting down as I was graduating.
Everyone was boycotting Wall Street too.
Boycotting Wall Street. I mean, it was just, I was listening to Peter Schiff. He's like, dude, the whole world's melting down. Like it was just a crazy, crazy time. No one that I knew were getting any decent jobs. It was really tough. And then I had a mutual friend of ours that also at the same time was graduating and wanted to start his own business and be an entrepreneur as well. So I think it was really the push of those two things. He actually approached me and said, hey, do you want to start something together? I had been starting side businesses in college and even one in high school. Nothing serious because I didn't know how to sell. I couldn't gain any traction with revenue. But I liked the idea, like the novelty of it. And so he had kind of noticed that, and I think that's why he approached me on it.
So let's talk about that. So you go to Michigan State University. You've got this background, and your parents are divorced. Dad's moved to Florida. You're on your own, no safety net, and you got to figure out like some sort of career path. Fraternity brother comes to you and says, "Hey man, like let's go start a business. Let's go make some money."
It was literally that way. He's like, "Do you know how to get insurance and file an LLC?" I was like, "Yeah, I can do that."
So he leans on you for the technical and like legal aspects, and then
absolutely.
So talk about the first company, man.
All right,
college painting business, right?
So yeah, it was a college painting. So he had an internship previously, I think for a few years, and I actually worked for him one summer. A few of the fraternity brothers and I both worked for him. So I mean, I was hanging off of 40-foot ladders and like everything that you're not supposed to do in construction and the trades, and like wearing flip-flops to work, and it was just a hot mess. But it was a really fun summer. Didn't really make much money, but got sunshine, got fit. It was a really cool opportunity to work in that realm of business. So I was already exposed to it a little bit, and I knew that the guys that were hustling, like closing the deals, which he was, were making the big bucks. And I was like, man, like that's something I should be doing, but I don't know how to sell. I'm not a sales guy. Yeah, that was a skill set I had no experience in. And so when he approached me, I was like, yeah, let's do this. Like we'll knock it out of the park. We'll just give it our best go. To me, we just graduated. It was the start of summer. It was like early spring. So I thought it was going to be like a summer gig. Maybe I can make a few bucks, save up some money, and then get my job in the fall. So we hit the ground running. He showed me the ropes. He's like, here's how you sell. Here's how you prospect. We're going to go door to door. I watched him do it first, and he just knocked on doors and got rejected. And I was like, this is brutal. I was like, I'm not going to survive this at all. But I'm not a quitter either. By this time, I'm like, this is something I'm going to stick to. The only thing, I was a serial quitter. I used to take piano lessons, violin lessons. I took Japanese, like fun stuff. But when it got really hard, I quit. I was a serial quitter. When I was in high school, I ran cross country. I was a pretty chubby kid as a teenager. Girls wouldn't talk to me. I was self-conscious. And joined cross country. I said, I'm not going to quit no matter what. And so the first 2 years were brutal, but I ended up getting onto the JV team, and I ended up running pretty quickly by senior year. And I was running 6 miles a day in the summer. So that was when I learned how to not quit. And I told myself, I'm going to do this. This is business. This is something I have to keep with. I have to learn. I have to master this. I'm not going to quit no matter what. So I watched him do it, strike out. Then he got the sale. Or, he got the lead, he got the appointment, and then you do appointments after appointment after appointment, then you get the sale. But when I saw that happen, I was like, oh, it's possible. This is something I can do. And so he watched me do it, and then I did it over and over. And to be honest, for the first, it felt like an eternity, at least the first couple of months, I was horrible. I sucked at door-to-door sales, and I hated every second of it. Literally, he would observe me, and I would knock on the door. Homeowner would peek through the door. Back then, people at least opened their doors. And I would start asking them, like, hey, I noticed that your house needs to be painted. Would you be interested in a free quote to get your house painted? Like, the answer should be yes. But I was, shaking my head no the whole time.
So you're subconsciously.
Obviously, you're not going to want me to come to your door, give you a quote. So, there's little subtle things you do that you sabotage yourself in doing. So I had to rewire my mind. I had to unlearn those bad habits. And then I started realizing that if you don't quit, you have the right body language, you're confident, you're knowledgeable. I'd learn more and more about the business as I went on. Your success rate starts to increase. And so although it's brutal in the beginning and it's hard work no matter what, you start to see light at the end of the tunnel. And eventually it started to get fun. I started to realize that if I knock on enough doors, I'm going to sweat my butt off, get some sunshine, get fit. And every no, every rejection is just one more closer to that yes. And when you get it, nothing feels better than getting the win. And that was my exposure to prospecting, to grinding and lead generating. And I've applied that to every other business since.
That's awesome. So you guys literally started that business with essentially no money. I remember you guys, you ended up closing, you closed deals, took deposits, and then went and bought a painting truck for what, $500?
We started with $100. We had to file the fee to the state of Michigan, which was maybe $35 at the time. I think we bought a paintbrush for $12, literally $100. And I don't think we even spent it all. We spent $96. It was a shoestring budget, the most shoestring budget you can imagine. And as we went door to door, we'd start booking jobs. When you book a job, you take a deposit. And so sometimes that deposit might be 10%. We juiced it up to 20% or sometimes 25%. Took some pretty big deposits, but we started getting some cash in the bank that we could use to start buying materials. So we bought our first work truck for $400. We were in East Lansing, right off Michigan State campus. Drove into Lansing, Michigan, found a guy on Craigslist that was selling his truck. He fired it up. That was all we needed to know. We handed him $400 cash and just drove away. I don't remember registering the vehicle. I'm sure we probably did something, but we just literally picked up and went. And it was a tiny little pickup truck. I don't even know what model or anything. It was the smallest one I've ever seen. It sounded like it was a little 4-cylinder. It was absolutely terrible, but it'll carry a ladder and some gallons of paint. So we drove it off, and then we ended up spray painting it black and stenciling the name of our company on there, the Student College Painting Company. And we ended up booking a couple of jobs just from that truck as an advertisement, which was pretty cool. So we started throwing ladders in it, just beat it up, and it lasted, I think, at least that season, maybe even a little bit longer.
That's awesome, man. So that first summer you guys did the business, you have any idea? I mean, it's been 15 years, but do you remember how many jobs you guys booked, or how many? Because you guys would hire painters then to do the jobs. You guys would sell them, you'd oversee them, and then manage the process. Just talk about what that business looked like in case these young kids decide they want to go knock doors and start a painting company, which is easy to do even today.
It is easy to do. I mean, look, it's hard. It's hard work.
It's hard work, though.
It's excruciatingly hard, but the barrier to entry is very, very low. That's why I ended up doing other things, and I didn't continue with the business. Others have, and have done really, really well, too. We had a buddy that was in the same line of business, started a franchise, and now he's around the entire country. I travel, and I see his franchise all the time. So it can be done, for sure. I don't remember the number of jobs we did. I think we were painting a house every 2-3 days, and we booked up that whole summer. We even did a small commercial project at the end. But I remember thinking like, if I could make 10 or 15 grand this summer, this is in 2009. So like great recession.
That was a lot more money back then. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was a lot, like money was worth a lot more before 2020, right? But like you go all the way back to 2009 and like they were giving houses away. So like, and everything, trucks, like the truck we bought, materials, everything was discounted and food was cheap. You know, I never remember even worrying about that. So yeah, my goal was like, hey, make 10 or 15 grand. That'd be a great little summer gig. And then, you know, I'll go find out what I want to do for a career. Everyone thinks they're going to make 100 grand a year out of college. I was one of them. But I actually made like a pretty decent amount of money. I think we made like 40 or 50,000 bucks in 4 months, like 4 or 5 months. It's a short season in Michigan. And I was like, wow, this is actually a career. Like this is something I could do. And I wouldn't have to go work for a guy in a stuffy office, wear a suit and tie. I am going to be like door knocking in places. Like I've been attacked by dogs, like door knocking and like prospecting, cold calling. Like that is serious business. It's tough. It'll definitely put some hair on your chest. And
get stung by bees a lot too. If you
I get stung by like, dude, you name it. People have been like people point guns at people that go door. Like I've heard crazy stories. It hasn't happened to me or any of my employees, but you know, other friends in college and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it was a serious business. I was like, we could actually scale this up, and so we decided like, yeah, let's do this another year. It was kind of like take it as it goes. And so we actually expanded to 2 different cities, and then we actually expanded into another state, into Ohio.
I remember you guys hired a lot of young kids and trained them.
A lot of young kids. So like that's the thing. We did it ourselves the first year. The second year was like, hey, I think we could teach other people how to do this. I think we might have recruited like 12 college kids, and a lot of them quit. Like we might have ended with like 5, 6 maybe, but those 5, 6 like made some money. They did really well. We did our own sales, ran our own crew, did really well. What was really cool about that business is like we not only ran our own small company, which we learned how to do from scratch, and it became a success, at least in our eyes, right? But we taught other people how to start their business too. So it was under our LLC, our insurance, our models, all of our own proprietary information for pricing. And we would teach them how to prospect, how to go door to door, how to talk to clients, how to quote business. But they were in charge of actually hiring their own painters, which were usually college kids as well, sometimes not. But they would hire their own crew, manage their payroll hours. We would process it at the top. But it was a great experience for a college kid to get out there and start their own business from scratch. And to be honest, the hardest part about starting a business, there's the operations side, which is tough, but there's nothing until you generate revenue. So we're teaching them how to generate revenue out of thin air with zero experience, zero qualifications. Like none of these kids have held a paintbrush or know what a latex paint is or anything about it. And that was a rewarding experience because we got to see other people grow. And it was tough to see other people fail. They didn't fail because it doesn't work. They failed because they quit. And I mean, I'm no stranger to quitting either. So like I get it, but you either do or you don't. And it was really fun to see that in action.
It's an amazing story, man. Especially because I feel like there's a lot of limiting beliefs. Community I grew up in, maybe similar to you, where people always say like, oh, it takes money to make money. That's just a lie. It's actually just not true. Like you can start with $100. Everybody has $100 now these days.
Right.
It's like, and you can literally start a business if you're willing to work and then do it. And
if you don't have $100, you ask grandma for $100. Like you can get what you need to get from point A to point B 100%, or mentor with somebody. Right? We've all mentored with others, and we've been mentors, and you can mentor too.
That's a great story, and I love that you guys scaled it. Started with $100. It was profitable. Did it for several years. Hired other college students. So let's talk about so you went from that first initial college painting company to a bunch of real estate businesses. I mean, you had an investment company. You were renovating, flipping homes. You were building homes. You also were acquiring properties and renting them out. I remember you got married somewhere shortly after that period of time. Talk to us about that next phase then after that first couple of years with the first business, what that looked like and how you transitioned. You took those lessons that you initially learned and then took them to the real estate business. It's
a blur now. So again, like back then I was a poor college kid, so making a little bit of money goes a long way. So I focused on not spending any of it. I was like, I didn't have health insurance. Like a lot of kids are like, how do I not? What would I do without health? I just didn't have it. If I got sick, I got sick. It sucked, right? But there were times where I didn't have health insurance and I was, didn't have money either. So I was really screwed. And so I just piled away cash. And then I knew that cash was just going to sit there and lose value over time. I didn't understand what fiat currency was and a lot of the understandings of economics. Even though I was an econ major, graduated econ, I didn't know anything about economics or finance. Like truly, none of my business friends did either. But I knew that money can't just sit in the bank. I mean, banks don't pay interest. We all know that. Our generation does. So you got to do something with it. What are you going to do? I played around with trading Forex and I blew up an account, lost some money. You know, some people play, like poker was really popular back then, but I suck at poker. At least then I did. And so I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this money, but I'm not going to like spend it. And so we started buying properties in Detroit, right? We actually bought some together.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That was where we started. Like we ended up going to some of the real estate investment groups out in Detroit, at the Detroit area. And I remember the first guy I met that would talk to me, I was like, I want to do business with you. Like that was it. I'm in business. I do business. It works. I want to do business with everybody. So I do business with the guy and he ends up selling us a house for $2,000. That was the first house we bought in the city of Detroit. It was part of a tape of assets. So investors back then were buying a whole series of houses from the bank because the banks couldn't offload them fast enough. They had to get them off the books. So you could cherry pick specific assets. I'm sure we bought the worst possible house, but it was for like the cheapest amount of money.
In the worst area, yeah.
Worst area. I knew nothing about Detroit. I really have never been to Detroit. Like grew up in Bloomfield Hills. They call it a bubble. Like I've been to Detroit 3 times in my life probably. But here I am, like we have title to a property. What do you do? Well, everyone knows if you buy real estate, you make money.
At least that's what a lot of people say, right?
It's what you hope. It's what you hope. You don't get into it to lose money, but guess what? A lot of people do. So I just remember, like, what do you do with this house? It actually was, it was terrible because it was in the middle of a rehab. Remember, they had redone all the hardwood floors. Yeah. The whole house was painted, smoke detectors throughout. Like they were getting it ready for Section 8 or whatever or an appraisal, whatever they were going to do on the flip. I remember checking public record and it looked like the repo happened and they owed like $119,000 on the house. Mm-hmm. And there was kind of a rule of thumb back then, like back in 2006 or 7, everyone said you could buy houses in Detroit and they'll all appraise for $100,000. So you buy them for 20 or 30, you fix them up and flip them. Well, it was repoed for that. We bought it for $2,000 cash. and there were no back taxes too. It was just legit title. Well, the title was the dude wrote a quick claim deed at Starbucks and slid it over to us. So we signed it. Or he signed it. And we're like, hopefully we have title to this property. No one's doing a title search because that would have been another $2,000. But yeah, we got keys.
That's right.
We might not have gotten keys. We probably had to kick in a door and change the locks, but we had a house, supposedly titled to the house. I hope we actually owned that house. I don't even know anymore. But what do you do? Like it still needs a whole, the plumbing system, HVAC, it needed all this other work still to be done. And we didn't want to put in a ton of money to fix up. We were still new to real estate. We wanted to hold whatever money we had. So what do you do? Like there's strategies, right? And a lot of guys were selling on land contract. So we tried selling it a couple of times, I think 3 times. And every single time someone would give us cash for the very first deposit or the first payment. Never got another payment since then. But every time they would like possess the house, they would just destroy the house. One time there was a guy that stopped paying. I think his name was like Dominic or something. And we're like, where's Dominic? Where'd Dominic go? He just stopped paying. Like we were texting him, nothing. And we ended up like searching on Google and like the guy was in prison somewhere. And I remember you and I actually went to go visit him.
To get title back.
Get title. Like, hey, well, we want to do this legit, right? Like we could do it illegit. There's people that just do whatever in Detroit, but like let's try to do this by the book. And so I remember we tracked him down. We found him, scheduled a time to go visit him. We had a cash for keys type document written up to get title back. And we go to meet him. We sit down at the booth. And then they bring him out, and he's expecting like a family member, and he's like, "Who's here? Who's here to see me? Who's that?" And he kind of recognized us. He's like, "Those guys, like what?
Oh, it's a guy just sold my house."
Oh, he was so upset. He's like, "Oh man, that's my landlord. I don't want to see my landlord." Oh man, but we end up getting some of his stuff back because people literally, like, if you vacate a property, they kick in the door, steal all your stuff. TV's gone, DVD's gone.
Yeah, we negotiated to give his stuff to his baby mama out on the street in exchange for him to sign over title back to us.
It was a sad situation.
So we could resell to somebody else.
You got to help them any way you can. So like we did it. We got possession back, and we sold it a couple more times and lost money. I think we sold that house for $800.
Yeah, we got like what, $500 on each deposit or $800.
Yeah.
But it was a great learning experience for sure. It was a ton of fun, good stories. But from there, we actually did a lot of. Once we got out of Detroit, we did a lot of successful real estate deals.
We did a few more in Detroit, and they were kind of hit or misses. But you have to know your market, and we definitely didn't know our market at that time. And so once we got out of the city, you and I both did pretty well with real estate. And really from Detroit, it went into kind of suburban properties. So where I'm from, like Bloomfield Hills, Birmingham, Troy, Southfield area. Eventually I did move to Lansing for a little while. So I bought some properties there too. And we did really well in both markets. So you just have to learn your market. You have to really dive in deep and understand what the comps are. What do homes rent for? What do they sell for? Are you buying it for the right price? Once you rehab your first house, you're going to make a ton of mistakes. You're going to go over budget. You're not going to know what you're doing. But once you do it, you realize, okay, here's what I can budget for rehab. Here's the work I know I can get done, and you can price that in better the next time around.
You learn how to hire and fire contractors, screen a little better, yeah.
Man, back then too, you throw up a Craigslist ad, and you'd have like experienced men twice my age show up, and they would literally line up. Like you could offer $12 or $14 an hour, and it was a terrible time. I felt terrible for them, and like it was scary for us too. But at least back then, you could get work done cheap. And,
sure.
Material
it's
costs
the
were
opposite.
low. Now it's the opposite. Like try even like finding people that know how to do the work. It's hard.
Yep. Especially for fair pricing.
Yeah.
It's amazing how fast the market's changed.
Yeah.
From then till now, the demand, and like it was wild to go through 2008 too and watch that market collapse. Like in Detroit, where houses were selling for $150,000,
Yeah.
sell for $2,000.
Yeah.
No financing. I mean, it was wild.
Remember West Bloomfield Hills? Like we were buying homes for 40, 50, 60 grand maybe.
Yeah, way below build cost.
Way below.
But then when we would renovate them and flip them, they wouldn't appraise. Like you'd sell them and have a contract signed, and then like because the comps were so bad and everyone was scared of the market, the appraisers would underappraise, and then you'd have to discount the price of the property, and like there still wasn't a lot of margin there because you got hosed on the appraisal on the back end.
Well, I remember when we were running comps then, it was here's the ARV, here's what homes are selling for. We're going to sell ours for 10% lower. Like you had to run your numbers that way. That was an extra buffer on your profit margin because homes might have been slipping.
They were still going down in price.
They were going down. It was crazy. It was a wild time.
So talk about a couple of the first like either successful renovations where like we're talking about all the brutal lessons you learned early in the game. What are a couple of the first like successful flips you remember doing, or like rental properties that you bought? Because you did a lot of those over that duration of time.
I love rental properties. I especially loved them then. Once I did my first one, I was scared to death of my first rental property, and I'll touch on that. My first flip, though, I'll never forget it. First successful flip that was, a significant one. It was in Lathrop Village, and I remember chasing this deal down for like 6 months, and a bank owned it. It was a listing agent that repped the bank, and I wanted to pay like $40,000 for it. And it was listed maybe for like 60 or so, 63 or something, and they just wouldn't budge. 6 months, I kept hounding this listing agent with a few other properties, but I had my eye on this one because it was disgusting. A pipe had burst upstairs. The whole house flooded. There was mold everywhere. It was literally just a wreck.
This one was in Lansing?
This was in Lathrop Village.
Oh, Lathrop. Oh, I remember this house.
If you remember that one. So I actually raised money. I had my own cash, right? So we got out of some of the Detroit deals. I had some cash, saved up some more money. And then I remember going to a few family and friends, and I was like, listen, we're going to structure a company, did a little fundraise, and everyone throws in this money. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to rehab it. Bought it for like 40, put in 40, and then sell it. And I did some of the work myself. I was there every single day. I kept a really tight budget, a really tight schedule. I think I actually beat my budget. And I didn't even know how to budget a rehab. It was a ridiculous number. I probably cut every corner there was. But this is the best learning lesson. I had maybe like $80,000 into it cash. Sold it for like 125 or 127. I was really happy. I just wanted to sell it for over 100. It was a slam dunk. The guy that bought it with FHA financing, probably 3.5% down at that time.
Yep.
And interest rates were pretty low. He had some corporate job, whatever, bought it. And then he like cleaned it up a little bit. I did the rehab. Like I did tile. I did
all the hard work
structure, all the hard work. Literally, I was like spraying oil because I ran a painting company. I knew how to do it. I had a sprayer. I was spraying oil paint, and like everything was just getting all over. Definitely shaved off years off my life on this deal, but it was my first one and I had to get it right. sold it to the guy for $125. And I remember checking a year or two later, the guy sold it again. 2 years later, he sold it for like $225. The dude made $100,000 and never lifted a finger, lived in it, right? Covered his overhead or whatever taxes, but like did nothing. And I was like, I am in the wrong game. I mean, I like making money, but I was like, that was not a good experience compared to what I could be doing. And that's when I had to learn how to buy rental properties. I was scared to death because if you go to a real estate meetup, you read articles online, or I have family members all the time that don't know I have a background in real estate, or like through my wife's family or people I meet. Everyone's like, oh, you got to be careful of the rentals. Like someone knows someone that had one bad experience. I still hear it now from family members. And so you can't listen to that. It does happen. Like we had a hard time in Detroit too. Like it does happen. You can buy either the wrong property or at the wrong time, wrong location, or you're not managing it well. But most people do okay in real estate, renting out, as long as you do a little bit of research.
And you hold it for long enough.
And you hold it long enough.
Yep.
And so I was scared to death of having tenants because they had possession of the property. They could trash it. But that was the start of something great. It lit a spark. That spark turned into a fire, and I started buying rentals as fast as I could.
It's a great story. There's a lot of good points in there too to highlight. I mean, in the game of entrepreneurship, if you go on that route, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn lessons. Like from the painting company, the sales business, to Detroit, and then to actually doing successful flips. All those took like overcoming adversity, challenge, difficulty, and doing things that are uncomfortable, like naturally. But that like educational experience then built the tools for you to be extremely successful in business, and then also in a lot of different industries. That was a great first flip story, and it's a good testament to the lesson that you learned too. And I think that both of us looked back because we were flipping houses for a number of years, and then regretted all the assets we sold. If we would have been like wiser, we would have figured out how to raise financing and then fund and hold them, because we would have done so much better just holding the assets over a handful of years instead of
way better. We would have made 10 times as much money.
Oh, for sure. And we already did all the work up front. So it was like
on the buy, the negotiation, 6 months of negotiating, 6 months or 12 months of rehab. It was a lot.
So talk about one of your first rentals then. Like when you had that experience in Lathrop, you flipped that house, regretted it. I mean, we were doing a bunch of other ones at the same time. But then talk about a couple of the first rentals where once you had that experience, you actually decided to keep and rent them. And then how were you able to like stack those with limited funds, and how did that work?
So at this time I had that one flip. I was still working, running a business, still had the painting company. And I remember, so I'd met my fiance at the time, now wife, and we were getting ready to be married. I was like, well, I need to get a house. So like I was looking at everything under the sun. What am I going to buy? Where am I going to buy it? So I just started looking at condos. I wasn't going to buy a condo, but I was just looking at, what can you buy under a certain budget? I think I wanted to be under 50K or something. Now it sounds ridiculous, but like there was options under 50K. Like 50K was a very reasonable budget in 2010-ish, especially for condos too, because those things, they fall like a rock and they shoot up like a rocket. And so I remember there were two condos.
Well, it was impossible to get financing on a lot of condos back then.
That's true. That's very true.
Because a lot of them went into foreclosure. There were like the rental ratios were off.
Yeah,
the government agencies stopped lending in general in a lot of like riskier or transitional areas. So in Metro Detroit, there were a lot of like questionable areas. Like they wouldn't lend anything in the city of Detroit at all.
Yeah.
And then where on the edge suburbs where a lot of those condos were, I mean, it was very difficult. You couldn't get traditional financing unless it was from a local bank or credit union.
Yeah.
And even then it was tough.
Or hard money, but the rates would kill you.
Yeah, I mean, all the real estate prices got cut in half because people couldn't get access to financing.
That's true. Or lower. Yeah, even less. So I did buy a condo. It was in Southfield, and it was in a high-rise building. It was actually a luxury high-rise. It was really nice, 32 stories. And I just found this one condo. I'm like, wow, this looks kind of swanky.
Didn't it have 24-hour concierge too?
It did, 24 hours concierge. Yeah. Elevators with like stone, like tile around the elevators. It had a beautiful pool fenced in. It had a parking garage with an underground tunnel that was heated and air conditioned. I mean, this is like a very nice like luxury suite. And these condos were going for next to nothing. I think there was one on market for like 52K or 55. I ended up getting them down to, I think, 42, somewhere in that range, or somewhere around that. And back then it was so sad because you'd go to the closing table and people were literally in tears at closing. I don't know if you remember any of those situations, but they were brought to tears because they were seeing what they were selling it for. They didn't want to sell it, but everybody was forced to sell. or they just felt like they were stuck with it. And it felt like there was no end in sight. Like you wouldn't sell your property if you knew the market was going to rebound in 4 years, but nobody knew that for sure. We all thought it was going to zero. Even as investors, we thought, well, this could go to zero. Let's just do what we can. This guy wanted to take out all the faucets, all the light fixtures. Everything was upgraded. It was really nice. That's why I made an offer on the condo. And I was like, you're not touching anything or I'm not closing on the property. So I got it, paid cash. You got to pay cash back then. And that was the first property I bought as a primary. Lived there for maybe 6 months and we moved to Lansing. Instead of selling it, I decided I'm going to rent this one out. I think that was my first rental property. I take that back. There was one other condo I bought for $14,000. It was in Clinton Township. And I bought it sight unseen because of the price. And I ran the comps. I'm like, it's going to need 10 or 15 grand because it was a tiny little 1 bedroom, 1 bath or something. And I'm like, man, this place is going to be a full rehab, but whatever. I'll put in the offer, see if they take it. They did. When I went to go look at it after I was under contract, I realized that they had actually done a full renovation because there was a fire in that unit. So it had all brand new carpet, the lowest contractor grade you could buy, but it was new. Everything was painted, smoke detectors, everything new, countertop, everything was brand new. And I was like, wow, this is a home run. I was already under contract. I just had to close. I technically did rent that out before my Southfield condo, now that I think about it. But I had those 2 rentals right in a row.
Did you have that lease before you even closed on it and bought it?
I think I had it leased before we closed on it. Yeah. My wife was actually a waitress at the time, and it was a friend of hers from work. She's like, does anyone want to rent a property? We rented it for like $700 a month. HOA was like $120 a month. Taxes were like $70 a month. Insurance was like $30 a month. So like we had cash flow, man. It was a great, like 33% cash flow on the investment. It was a steal. You would get lucky a lot back then. And looking back, those were the good old days. But I remember I like broke down because I felt so poor. I'd bought 2 condos. I'd never rented one before. And the hot water tank wouldn't turn on. And I was like, like I don't have money for this. My father-in-law came and lit the pilot light and it fired right up. It was brand new, but you don't know. You're like, you get all stressed out because you over leveraged yourself. And looking back, I didn't over leverage at all. Like I was a fool for not borrowing more money and really cleaning up shop, but nobody knew. No one knew.
When we were young, we were figuring out too. We didn't have any live
Didn't have
guys.
access to capital.
Yeah.
Not easily. That was my first 2 rentals, and then from there we bought more.
Just continue buying and scaling them. So from there, you ended up like going into development for a while too. Like you were doing some large scale renovations and some larger builds in Birmingham, and in higher demand communities for a while before you guys ended up making that massive move to Florida.
Sure.
And I remember your transition. Real estate, you acquired a ton of rental property, were flipping, building. I think you had a small crew of kids that you were like managing and overseeing, and then you decided to make a massive, like, life-changing decision to move to Florida, which I think most friends, family, everyone else said, like, don't do it.
Yeah.
But you and your wife, like, in your heart, you kind of like analyzed all the cities across the country. And I remember you like talked about like you just want to get out of Michigan, the weather conditions, the stresses with also like that construction type business, and you want to go to like a higher growth market with more upside. Talk about that journey and like, because I mean, everyone goes through different phases in life, and some people are going to have to make it a tough decision or take a gamble or take a big risk to move to a new geographic region, and it's tough to do. But it ended up paying off for you guys like really well, paying dividends, and then most of your family ended up following you. You're almost like the patriarch leaders of the family, right? Migrated first.
A lot of my friends did too. I'm working on you still. That was a really great learning lesson, because that's when I realized that if you have passion in your heart, you're going to drive forward that much faster. So growing up, when I was younger, we were raised upper middle class before the divorce. We had a condo in Naples, Florida. So we'd go down there once, twice, sometimes 3 times a year. And I always loved spending time in Florida. That was my happy place. We'd spend holidays there, summers there, and it was brutal hot, but we just exercised and got fit. And then in college, we'd go to Panama City Beach. I would do cruises out of Miami and Tampa. I always loved Florida. But I also loved California. I started visiting San Diego. We went to Oceanside. We did a couple of really fun vacations out there. And I had just visited Denver, Colorado, and I was like, this place is amazing too. What I loved is that in California, Colorado, Florida, the sky is blue and the sun is out. I don't care if you're on a mountain and you're skiing in snow. People are wearing t-shirts and getting that sun. And I was getting a seasonal depression. So like in the summer, I would just crush it and go 90 miles an hour. Maybe a lot of people do. In the winter, I sometimes wouldn't leave my basement. I'm self-employed. You have to drive yourself. I just didn't have the drive in the winter. So it was this manic depressive kind of ebb and flow that I was just getting sick and tired of. At the same time, I was getting burnt out from some of the new construction deals, because doing construction is like you get one rehab right, cool. Then you do a few more and sometimes they go right. But it's a brutal business being in construction. Like I have a ton of respect for builders, ton.
Especially when you get to larger projects, because you were raising like private capital, interest rates were pretty heavy on the deals. Yeah. And then you started doing like really larger scale renovations, which took longer, were more complicated from a construction perspective compared to the cosmetic flips. And like all of that compounds when you have a lot of stuff going on, and you're in the life of the entrepreneur, and like you're not with a construction background, you're figuring it out as you go and learning.
I was a kid that took a builder's test like 3 or 4 times and failed it. Finally took it and passed, but I'd never touched a house, a tool. I mean, I did the light rehab myself, but that was still pretty cosmetic compared to framing, foundation, basements. I mean, all this stuff was new. But everything I did, I learned by doing. I never shadowed anyone. I never mentored. Looking back, I probably should have done those things. I would have learned more and gone forward faster. But I just learned I trial by fire. I just go get it done. You make mistakes, but you survive. And those deals ended up working out pretty well for the most part. I just realized that this is not something that I can scale and easily leave for like 6 months out of the year. Like if I do this business, I need to check into this job site every single day, even in the winter. And I was like, that's just not who I am. It's not what I want. And so I fire sold some of the properties, sold some of the rentals, kept the rest. And my wife and I jumped in our Jeep and just drove around the country for about 2 months. Just checking out different states, different cities. Went on some fun trips like to Mexico. It was the time of my life. We sometimes would get hotels. Sometimes we would just throw sleeping bags in the trunk and sleep in the car, like run it overnight. It was cheap. It was fun. I had protein powder, so we would make food, and sometimes we'd go out to eat. Like we were just living off the land for a little while. And it was a great opportunity to see what's out there. And when we got to Florida, we knew we wanted to be on the coast. And when we made it to Tampa and St. Pete, those felt like home. And so that's where we set roots. We basically shut everything down as overnight as possible. We just hopped in our car and drove down.
I remember like seeing the passion fuel you guys too, and like you getting to Florida, it being like new lands you're conquering. And what was impressive to me is like the very rapid pace in which you rebuilt. I mean, you moved geographic locations against everyone's counsel and advice, and you guys started Lombardo Realty, and you started as like you just started selling real estate, analyzing the market data, taking all the skill sets and abilities you had from Michigan, understanding of construction and trades and rental property and cash flow, and like deployed it there. And together you guys built a real estate team very quickly. And then within like a year, you started your own brokerage, and then you guys had Lombardo Realty, and like you were a well-known like household name in Tampa, and you guys had a ton of agents, you were training and counseling. And it seemed like it happened so fast. Like talk to me about how you guys were able to like move locations and then rebuild a business so quickly together, and kind of what that looked like.
It probably looked like it probably was done quickly, but it felt like an eternity time-wise, but we were having the time of our life doing it. When I got to Florida, I realized like this is where I belong. It was sunny every day. It does get hot in the summer, but I love the heat. Like this is just so, we go to the beach whenever we want to, palm trees. If you're inside making calls and you're feeling stressed out, you walk outside, it's sunny with palm trees. Like you can't go wrong. So that was like singing to my heart. My wife and I both were very inspired, and we were very passionate about living there. So I think when you have that passion, you're willing to go the extra mile. You're just going to go make it happen and grind. And anything I did in the past, any of the prospecting for when I was painting houses and training young entrepreneurs, I applied all of it to real estate. The difference is you have to learn how to fill in a contract. You have to learn how to negotiate. There's a lot of moving parts to real estate. I'm not minimizing that, but all those are operations. You can learn operations. You can sometimes sub out operations. Like you can bring in team members. But at the end of the day, this is a revenue-based business. Sales is no different. Brokerage, no different. So I always focused on generating revenue, meeting new people. In addition to prospecting, I did a lot of cold calling. I did door knocking, all the same stuff I did for the painting company. I did that in real estate, and we just took off like a rocket. It also was good timing too. We moved down there in about 2014. So Tampa was still relatively undiscovered, but people were talking about it. It was one of those markets that people had their eye on, and the whole country was starting to rebound now by this point. So real estate was starting to climb up in value instead of drop. So it wasn't so crazy that you couldn't buy, it wasn't like 2020 where like prices were going through the roof, but we were starting to appreciate again. And
so really fast, you talked about like you took all the skill sets that you knew from like essentially door-to-door sales in the painting business, and you apply it to real estate, which is very difficult to do.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this that are like, how did you motivate yourself? Because you admitted earlier you hated doing it. Like no one likes doing door-to-door sales and doing the grind. Like those of us in the business realm have done it. We realize how valuable it is, but you have to have that mindset. But how did you when you'd already done that phase, how'd you bring yourself to then do it again in Florida? And how'd you motivate yourself to do that even though you hated doing it?
I was hungry. I knew this is where I wanted to live, where I wanted to be. I had sold a couple of properties for friends in Michigan, but that was never my model. It was really real estate acquisition was my primary focus. So this is the first time that I took brokerage seriously, retail properties. And there was no turning back. It was like you either make this work or you drive home. Right? And I'm not driving home. I live under a bridge before I drive home. It's just how I felt at the time. And that's how much I loved it there, right? I was just really passionate about what I was doing, and I love real estate. It was, here you wear a suit and tie, right? In Florida, I didn't know, no one wears a suit and tie. So I'm literally on people's asphalt driveways in 98-degree heat, just dripping in sweat, just melting. But I was still having the time of my life. I'm like, oh man, if I sell this house, I'll make 20 grand. There's money to be made here. And for me, those were big numbers, and you can stack those up. I actually remember my first time coming down. I was a licensed real estate broker in the state of Michigan, but I wasn't licensed in Florida yet. And the first client I worked with, we were talking a little bit, and she's like, okay, I'm going to have you, it was a friend that I met when we were out and about. She's like, I'm going to have you help me buy my house. Okay, and I had some experience buying properties, but I didn't have any experience in Florida. I wasn't even licensed yet. Didn't break the law, but what I did do was send Zillow properties to her. I was still taking my tests and getting all the licensing. To me, that's nuanced, but it's important. You have to have that done. And I remember before we had the first showing, I just got licensed. I didn't even have time to go to the board of directors or anything, but I was able to legally show the property. I don't know who let us in, but I was able to show it. And we showed a few houses, and she bought a townhome. And it was the first transaction. So I had closed that transaction before I even had the license, or it was after I was licensed, but started that process before I was even finalized with the paperwork. And it was within a couple of months of moving there. It was really, really fast. And that's when I was like, this is serious business. I'm just going to take this to the next level. And we hustled hard. We became one of the top producing teams at the brokerage we were at. And then there's no reciprocity between Michigan and Florida, but if you get your Florida broker's license, they'll use experience from other states. So I was able to get my broker's license in about a year when I decided to get it versus waiting the 2 years and then starting. So we had started our real estate brokerage about a year after we moved there, which was pretty cool.
That's fast. Very rapid pace. What's amazing, man, with your story is it's so opposite to a lot of people's mentality. A lot of people have analysis paralysis. They're so afraid of failing or making mistakes that it's tough for them to ever take action or do things. And I feel like when you made the decision to live the entrepreneurial path, it's you set your mindset that you're not going to quit, and you just do it until you figure it out and it's executed. And that ability to move quickly benefited you throughout your entire entrepreneurial path. I mean, buying houses sight unseen before you saw them, having deals in process and almost closing before you even have your licensing set up and done in the new state. It's just full court press, all action first, and figure it out later. Yeah,
you can always clean up the mess, the small things, I think. That's one thing I learned in cross country. So when you start running long distance, your mind tells you you're going to die, stop, right? And I remember my coach would tell me you're not going to die. You're not going to get hurt. You have to push through the pain. And when you learn how to push through the pain the first time, you get that runner's high, a little euphoria, partly because you broke through that barrier, also because there's a chemical change in your body. And I think learning that lesson, like you just have to figure it out one time, and then you could start applying it to everything else. What I've noticed with winners is like they will win once doing one thing, and then they become winners. They just learn how to win. And a lot of that is just not quitting. It's grinding hard and just not giving up. You got to see it all the way through to the finish line.
That's awesome, man. So next phase, you guys built the real estate brokerage in Tampa. Very successful. Ended up like training a lot of agents, bringing a lot of educational value from the investment side to that space, creating a great culture, a really cool brand. I mean, there was a lot involved in that. The events you guys did, the community. I mean, I remember we flew down for a couple of them, and you guys had massive parties and like did really cool stuff. Really changed the space and made a huge impact in a very short duration of time. From there, you made some other transitions. I mean, you started a property management company eventually. I remember that you also got involved in the mortgage space, and then eventually you started buying insurance companies and building a book of business in that space. So, like, talk about this next phase. So, we talked about the beginning of the life, all the entrepreneurial experiences, college. The massive transition to Florida, brokerage is established. Now, where have things gone from there?
So,
that was 10 years ago, I think.
How long we moved there?
Yeah,
it's been about 10 years.
10 years. So we're almost
exactly
a decade,
10 years. Yeah, and we had the brokerage for about 8 at this point. So, you just same thing as finding clients, same thing as booking paint jobs. You go find realtors. And you find realtors that you can help with a brand, with a structured foundation, with training. I would go door knocking with 5 or 6 of them, teach them how to do all of that stuff. Cold calling. I had guys in a back room, like flying drones while they're on headsets, 3-line dialer with Mojo, like just ripping through phone numbers. And a lot of my agents were doing real estate transactions too, acquisition deals. So dropping note cards, wholesaling, buying rentals, and they still do now. Some of my top agents are developers now and investors. We recruited around 230 agents during the course of time, and we have about 85 licensed agents currently with us now. But what I realized is when you get into real estate brokerage, there's actually not a lot of money in real estate brokerage. It's a very competitive industry. There's a lot of brokerages. There's a lot of good brokerages. Ours was unique. It was young, trendy. I don't know anyone else that had a 30-year-old real estate broker. Maybe not even that, might have been 28. And so you realize that just being a brokerage isn't quite going to get the job done. Like really it's the ancillary businesses that produce the net profit. So I've been dabbling and looking into some other businesses. The big one was lending. So I actually became a licensed MLO and was writing loans for a few years. Tough business, but made a lot of money doing it. The other one was insurance. And this is where the spark really lit, because insurance is a financial business, financial service business. Starting an insurance agency, like anything else, is a grind. You think, oh, this is going to be great. You sell a home policy. We obviously have a bunch of home leads because like all of our agents need an insurance agent. So we could turn the lead flow right on. But the average commission is like $100. And so really getting off the ground is really hard. And we did. We know how to grassroots started an insurance agency. I partnered with a really good friend of mine who's fantastic. And we just hit the ground running. We got our first appointment. But what we realized is that we're not going to get anywhere with organic growth. We don't have a top salesperson. I'm doing other things. She's more of doesn't want to do like heavy sales like that. And neither one of us were really fit for that. So what do? I looked into acquiring insurance agencies, reviewed it, researched it a little bit. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to blast out some letters out there, reach out to some agencies I know, and see if anyone's willing to sell their insurance agency. Because we might not be able to grow it very fast organically, but we could grow it pretty fast if we acquire. And like, I'd rather acquire an insurance agency, which is a huge amount of cash flow, than even commercial real estate at this time. Like, this is something that will just keep adding to the income statement.
It's kind of like the corporate model.
It is.
Mergers and acquisitions, you buy cash flow.
What's beautiful about buying a business is the business you buy. First of all, they're a lot heavier cash flow, a lot higher ROI than an apartment building, because there's a lot more risks. You could drop the ball and blow the whole thing up. It's risky. But if you don't, the business you buy pays itself off. So we literally bought 4 insurance agencies in the last 3 years. This is pretty recent. And each one of those sellers was running the agency for around 25 to 30 years. It took that long for them to build an agency that they could sell. And that agency was profitable, but nothing crazy, right? So it's like if we went the traditional route, it would take us 25 years to make any real money in this business.
That's wild.
What's amazing is none of their kids want to touch insurance. Nobody wants to get into insurance. This is home and auto. It is boring. It's a sleeper. And no one wants to get the license. And everyone is like in their 60s that has been in this business, it feels like. So we're getting calls left and right. We're like, we've got some deals to look at. And so
you sent out some letters and get a ton of calls from guys that want to get out of the insurance business. It took 30 years to build it.
There's no buyers. It's like,
it's amazing.
What
a great niche.
Oh, it's awesome. But again, tough business, but what isn't? But what we ended up doing was, since we're meeting these sellers, I was working in some of the financing. So some of the deals I bought in Lansing, Detroit, and in the suburbs were seller finance deals. The first house I moved into in Birmingham, I bought from a seller for $500 a month. It was a home run deal. It was awesome. Beautiful home. I ended up renting that house out for like $1,850 a month, which back then was a lot of money.
I remember that. And then the tenant asked you if they could install a $6,000 privacy fence on your property.
I said, if you pay for it, I'll let you get it done. And they're so happy to do it. That was a great rental. Don't be afraid of rental properties. But listen, if we could do it in real estate, of course we could do it buying a business. And so I worked in some terms that were just awesome. They were great terms. Great for the seller. Again, like, who's buying this business and for what price? Like, I honestly didn't even know what the market price should be. I did a little research on what they kind of looked like out there, and what makes sense. You got to build in buffers, and we came up with a number that works for us, and it ended up being a home run deal. Every single book that we bought. Pros and cons to all of them, but financing them the right way with the right price, the right terms, and the right seller is the game changer. And it was the best decision we ever made for that business.
So I'm sure some people are asking the question, like, why would someone spend 30 years building a book of business, and then why would they sell it to you?
Burnout. I'm 38 years old, and I feel it now. So I can't imagine being, 68 years old or 62 years old. Like, they're burnt out for good reason. They worked their butts off. They fought the good fight. Now they need to prepare for something else. They're tired. They want to spend time with their family, their kids, their grandkids. I get it. And so I empathize with them. I create solutions, and we handcraft a deal that works for everybody. It's a win-win.
That's a beautiful structure. I mean, it's amazing to me that you took like the creative strategies from the real estate space, seller financing, all the crazy deal structuring that we learned how to do, and then you were able to apply that to starting to acquire legitimate books of business in a completely different industry.
If there's one theme I really learned, is that if you get the basics of running a business down, there's 2 components in my mind. There's lead gen revenue and there's operations. You can do those 2 things in any business. There might be licensing and regulatory requirements. There might be a learning curve. But if you can just focus on those 2 things and nail both of them, you're going to have a successful business. I don't see how you could fail.
That's awesome. It's a very good summary. So I know we're running short on time here. So we talked about the insurance company acquisitions. There's a lot of other stuff we could talk about. We just don't have time to get into it today. Talk to me about your approach to finance, because, you get the insurance companies you guys have acquired. You ended up developing a passion in the Bitcoin space, started a private investment fund there. And then you've done a great job of managing money in the market, and trading options. And now you have a huge passion in the finance space, which you've always had. I mean, you studied finance in school, but you've done a great job with those as well. And that's an additional, almost completely different type of business model.
Very different business model. But at the end of the day, we're talking business, finance. We're all trying to accumulate cash flows. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can buy a business, start a business, buy real estate, a lot of ways to generate cash flow, but you can also do it in the financial sector in different ways. One thing I learned in 2020 especially is that if you look at the actual inflation rate, I know a lot of us like to use CPI number. Like, what's the CPI? Is it 2.5 or is it 3? But if you look at the increase of the money supply, which is average around 10% a year in modern time, 7% if you go back historically, that number's it's increasing. With traditional finance, the problem is getting an 8% return is phenomenal. I mean, like the S&P 500 is your go-to index for your risk rate of return. The ideal, you can't beat it. Like statistically, you cannot beat the S&P 500 unless you take on leverage or you start a business and put in your time and effort. As an investment, that's always been the gold standard, basically. The problem is the S&P 500 keeps up with the rate of inflation. It doesn't exceed it, the money supply itself. And most other investments are much lower than that. You look at bonds, you look at maybe some commercial real estate, certain things. If you're not leveraging to the hilt, you're not keeping up with even inflation.
And that means you're actually not preserving capital. And most people don't realize that. I think it's going to become more widely understood post 2020 because how rapidly the U.S. is devaluing the dollar. But historically, people haven't really fully understood that concept, and they don't understand fiat currency either, I don't think.
Exactly. 100%. Most people I talk to, when I say fiat currency, they're confused. They have no idea what I'm talking about. The money we have is not backed by anything at all, except for I said so. And that's what fiat means by declaration. So we're all playing this game of, okay, the money's worth something because, but there's nothing fundamentally behind it. And that's when I came around to Bitcoin. Bitcoin specifically is a hard asset. It's something that you can't create more of out of thin air. There's a protocol that dictates the number of Bitcoin that are available ever to be created. And so it's a hard asset, and it's a hard asset you can count on. And so I acquire Bitcoin as a treasury reserve. I've also started trading, a few years ago, I started trading stock options. So that's one way that you can generate cash flow on an investment based on Bitcoin derivatives being Bitcoin companies, and get a great return on your investment and generate cash along the way, which has been something I'm really fond of. It's been a great investment for me and for my investors too.
Let's talk about that a little more. So how do you manage your cryptocurrency portfolios? Like what's your long-term investment strategy?
My long-term investment strategy is to buy Bitcoin. There are a lot of ways you can do that. What's beautiful about Bitcoin is you can actually take custody of your asset. It's a self-sovereign form of money. There's nothing else I can think of that you can actually take custody other than maybe gold, silver, precious metals. But there's a cost associated with it. You got to bury it in your backyard or buy a really expensive safe and hope no one tampers with it. With Bitcoin, you can load Bitcoin onto a hardware wallet and you can access it anywhere in the world at any time. So you can become a self-sovereign individual and actually have your money if and when you want it. So that's really my primary focus, is how to acquire more Bitcoin over time. That's my savings reserve. Bitcoin traditionally has outperformed the money supply. It's outperformed inflation. It's really the only asset that has consistently without a lot of risk. By the way, volatility is not risk. So my main focus is how do I help others do the same thing, and how can we generate potentially income from it? So right now it's risky. It's tough to invest your Bitcoin and earn a yield on it like you would US dollars in the bank or buying bonds. But what I realize is with stock options, you could do a lot of the same things. So you can actually have an exposure to Bitcoin as a reserve asset through a company, but that opens up a securities market to you where you can actually sell contracts, sell call and put options to generate a yield on top of the actual appreciation of the asset. And that has been a lot of fun. For a financial mind, it's really fun to dive into. It's fun to have an understanding of it and to bring that to the table for other people to benefit from. That's really been my primary focus recently.
So can you explain your options trading strategy for beginners in the audience a little more thoroughly? And what's been your most significant kind of like win or loss in options trading? What'd you learn from it?
The way I would refer to options is that these are insurance contracts. I run an insurance agency. I own it with a friend of mine. And so we broker insurance to the carrier, right? The insurance carrier is the one that's assuming risk for a fee. The premium is the fee. With stocks, if you want to insure what you have for the future, you can buy insurance from somebody else. You're buying it from me. And that's called being a market maker. You're creating a market for somebody. Now, I'm assuming risk for you in return for a premium. That premium is earned income. It's income, and you earn it during the duration of the contract. There are contracts that expire daily. There are contracts that expire weekly. There are contracts that expire monthly and yearly and in between. And so there's a huge market out there where you can actually buy or sell insurance against the stocks that you own or want to buy. And so that's been a really, really great way to gain more exposure to the market with liquidity and generate an actual income from it. And you can determine your level of risk that you want. There are two types of options contracts. There are calls and there are puts. And both of those are ways that you're able to either offset risk if you buy those options or assume risk if you sell those options. One, you're paying a premium. The other, you're earning the premium. Sometimes I do both. There are strategies where you might sell and buy and a lot of different great strategies with options contracts. I think initially it can be very intimidating, but if you just start, again, I just do. I do it. I lost money. I made money. I did it. But you can research it too. Everything's available online for free these days.
So let's talk about, we've kind of highlighted and touched on a lot of different amazing businesses and journeys and industries that you've been in. I think we'll probably do a follow-up and we'll need to go a lot more in depth, I think, on like monetary history and Bitcoin for the majority of the audience to grasp those concepts. And we can always talk about options trading more then. But let's talk about the overall like life decisions of people, the younger kids that are coming out of college, or maybe they're in high school right now trying to consider career paths. The world's changing very rapidly. Talk to me just about like this entrepreneurial life that you've lived and looking back on it, you know, the opportunities to travel and do stuff with Julia and your wife and like, you know, the events you guys have done and hosted. And looking back, is there anything you would have done differently?
Sure. Looking back with what I know now, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. Like I mentioned, like when I was buying property early on, I would have leveraged way more money or figured out some way to get more capital. Even when I moved to Tampa, I was acquiring real estate and we were doing some wholesale deals and transactions, but I didn't take it nearly serious enough. You know, houses in St. Pete and Tampa were selling for $150,000 all day long. I helped clients buy for those prices, and those same homes are now selling for around $300,000 to $400,000. That all happened in less than 8 years. Most of it happened in the last 4 years since COVID.
Again, that's a testimony to like fiat currency. The more US dollars that they print, the more those dollars chase scarce and desirable assets in growing markets. And real estate historically has been one of the best hedges against inflation outside of the S&P. If not better, because you can use leverage, you get depreciation, tax benefits. And that's really what has been the driving force for the U.S. real estate market is it's truly used by the wealthy as a hedge against inflation. And when they see those growth trends and people are migrating to Florida, that starts driving pricing and offsets the effects of inflation. And people need to shelter their cash.
They need to shelter their cash. The winning trade of the century, and really longer than that, but especially since 1971 when we left the gold standard, the winning trade is short the dollar or short any fiat currency and long a hard asset. Real estate's the easiest way, hands down, to do that. So that's why so many successful people own a lot of real estate. They buy a lot of real estate. Most of them leverage their real estate, not all. But that's a fundamental way to short something that's definitely declining in value over time and long something that's increasing in value over time. So
it's funny, man, that you looking back, the first thing that comes to mind that you would do differently is you actually would have used more leverage.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people got wiped out in 2008 because they were over leveraged. We were very conservative and didn't use enough leverage.
Yeah.
And so in hindsight, like that's one thing you go back and change.
Absolutely. That would have been a game changer. I'd be retired by now, like very, very comfortably retired. The other thing too is I mined Bitcoin in 2013, but I didn't take it seriously. I had a computer. I bought 3 graphics cards. I read about it in a local newspaper. I'm like, oh, that's a novel thing. And I literally learned how to mine Bitcoin back when there were no exchanges. Maybe there was Mt. Gox, but there were hardly any ways to actually hold in custody Bitcoin. Really hard to use. And I think Bitcoin was around like maybe $200 or $300 at the time. The other regret I have is that I didn't take it more seriously back then. If I had, even though I did really well with real estate, brokerage, businesses, I, again, would be on an island somewhere right now if I just bought Bitcoin. Lots and lots of it. And you don't even have to leverage Bitcoin for that to make a huge impact.
So what do you think the essential qualities are for someone that would want to become an entrepreneur? Like, let's say that these young kids are analyzing their life. They're like, okay, go to college, get a good job, work for a living. They realize that no longer really works. It's not an effective strategy unless you're going to be a very specialized professional, right? We'll make that exclusion. So high performance executive, physician, specialized technician, trades / business owner. Outside those categories, like, the old school mantra of just go to school, get a good job doesn't really work. And wages are not keeping up with inflation. Right. So, like, let's say a young kid's analyzing, like, what if they're looking at their own skill sets and abilities, what do they need to be a successful entrepreneur?
1971 was a pivot point for wages. 1971, if you look this up, is a specific date. We left the gold standard in 1971. Richard Nixon removed us from the gold standard finally. There were other DPEGs before that, but we actually completely were no longer backed by gold or precious metals. When that happened, wages stopped keeping up with the rate of inflation significantly. So if you wonder why your parents or grandparents were able to have one job, still have a really nice, like, 2-story home with a white picket fence, a dog, and a Cadillac in the driveway, a lot of it is because back then you could do that with your salary. Now you can't. So everyone's looking for something else. Now, look, you can live a great life if you keep your overhead low, don't go into debt, and you go into the trades or get a great job. You definitely can do that, but you won't have your freedom of time. The one thing that I've had my whole life pretty much is that I chose when and where to go on my terms. Even in college, like, I literally didn't show up to exams and flunked classes because it was my time. I decided what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. Not a great attribute in some cases, but, like, it's a sovereign attitude. And I didn't realize how hardwired that was in me. And that's one of the greatest benefits of being an entrepreneur. What makes you a great entrepreneur to be able to do those things is you have to be curious, in my mind. Like, you have to have curiosity. You have to want to dive into research and learn. And you have to be hungry. You have to have grit and drive. You have to go and not stop. The biggest problem I see people make in any industry that I've trained people or helped people start businesses or start their careers in real estate is they work hard, they start, but they don't keep up with it. Someone might give it 3 months or 6 months, but all of their deals are 9 months away and they quit or they change gears, they do something else. And it's really, really sad to see because that success is right there. Sometimes it's further off than you want. It makes it's very uncomfortable. I know early on, like our start, it took maybe years to really gain traction, and you'd hope it'd be months. But you have to put in that time and give it that effort the entire way, and eventually you will see fruit from that labor.
The momentum compounds too over time. So It's like that curve on the chart, and it slowly compounds, and then after a handful of years, it compounds much more rapidly.
I'm a huge fan of the compound effect, and not only does money compound, but I think good habits compound, like exercise, right? You can show up and exercise a little bit every day, and you're going to get stronger and healthier. Versus someone that exercises hard for 6 months and stops, they're not going to be healthier in the future. Maybe a little healthier now, but that compound effect is real. So I also, in my life, I try to add a quality attribute to what I'm doing a little bit at a time. If I want to change my diet, I change it a little bit over time, but with a goal. Same thing with exercise routine and staying healthy, and in business too. You don't have to reinvent the wheel overnight. You can take your time and keep adding and adding and adding to it.
All right, last couple rapid fire questions.
Sure.
What's been your biggest lesson in managing and leading teams? Because you've managed and led a decent amount of teams and people in different organizations and businesses.
For me, it's learning who they are. I like to know who I'm working with, and that's how I can approach them as a team and create a cohesive team. And maybe on top of that is just showing up. Like, you have to do things for your team to build a successful team.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think the best advice I ever received was not structured verbal advice. It was just witnessing my father grind really hard. I think that really planted a seed in me. He never quit. He never stopped. He got up early. When I'm sick, I take a day off. And he never did that. And so seeing his level, the level he was playing at, was the best piece of advice he could have given me. And I don't know if he even realized that he had.
What advice do you have for the next generation of entrepreneurs, the young guys coming up that realize the world's changing, the job market's not what it was? They're going to dedicate themselves to not quitting. They're going to enter the grind. They're going to hop in the arena, join the game. They're going to choose to live the entrepreneur's life. What advice and counsel do you have for them?
My advice to that young person is find something you're passionate about. You can make money doing anything, and I have, and many do. But if you're passionate, you can really go the extra distance. Find something you're passionate about, something that resonates with you, that gives you the lifestyle you're looking for.
Are there any markets or sectors you think people should specifically be looking at getting into?
I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin. If it were me, again, one of my biggest regrets is I didn't take it seriously enough in 2013. I would be looking at Bitcoin as an industry. Blockchain technology, the Bitcoin specifically, cryptographic currency, it's changing the world. And I think if you can pinpoint that, whether you just start dabbling or buying, or you get a piece of the action, or you even jump in deep and start a business, you're going to do exceptionally well.
Antonio, that's been awesome, brother.
I appreciate it.
It's been a lot of fun. And there's a lot of good snips in here and great content. We'll do a summary on it. And if you guys want us to do follow-ups on any of these topics or different individual businesses, whether it's more real estate specific, brokerage specific, insurance, Forex and trading, or Bitcoin, comment, let us know, and we'll get together again and shoot another in-depth video specifically around one of those businesses or topics. Let us know what you guys want to hear about, and we'll put together some additional supporting content and go more in depth. Again, this is the Bulldogs Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, James Danley. We just wrapped up the podcast interview with Antonio Lombardo on the entrepreneur's life, and I want to recap with you guys my top 10 takeaways, and would love to hear what your top takeaways were. So, number 1, never quit. In Antonio's story, he talked about seeing his father's work ethic at a young age, but then once his parents went through divorce, he was left without that father figure to motivate him to not quit. He became a quitter. So he quit everything he did for a long period of time. And then once he became a young man, he had to make a decision to not quit and finish things. And that decision changed his entire life, because then he started winning and the taste for winning compounded. And so takeaway number 1 is make a decision to never quit. If you decide that you will pursue something, you will eventually and inevitably win. Winning is an inevitable outcome if you've consciously made that mental decision that you will not give up until you achieve the desired outcome. Number 2, passion drives you faster. When you have to do difficult things that you don't like to do, passion and the heart is what's going to drive you to do it quickly, do it effectively, and overcome the pain and adversity. So find a pathway forward if you can. If you're going to choose the entrepreneur's life, you want to be passionate about what you're pursuing. Number 3, learn by doing. Doing is one of the best ways to learn. Take action, figure it out later. It's a better way to live. A lot of people struggle with analysis paralysis, and they study and they analyze every detail and in and out. And it's not to say you shouldn't prepare. You should know your subject matter. But at some point, you've got to take action, and you got to eliminate fear and just figure out and problem solve along the way. And if you can make that a philosophy that you integrate into your life, where you take action quickly, you'll learn faster. Those results will compound, and you'll accomplish more than someone that's not willing to or able to take action quickly. Number 4, generate revenue first. He told the story about the very first company they started together in college with $100, and they went out and sold jobs, took deposits to then go buy the trucks, the materials needed to do those jobs. And it's a testimony to the fact that you do not need money to make money. In America, you can still door knock, and you can still generate revenue first and build a business from nothing if you decide to do so. Great testament to that. Number 5, the 2 basic components of business through Antonio's view are revenue and operations. Revenue solves a lot of problems if you can lead with revenue first. It'll solve a lot of problems in business, and then you just need to learn operations and how to build culture and manage people. Number 6, the entrepreneurial life provides freedom and sovereignty. If you want to go when and where on your own terms, you need to have some element of an entrepreneurial life to do so and to control your own time. Number 7, the winning trade of our lifetime is to go short the dollar in long, hard assets, primarily real estate and Bitcoin. Since the 1970s, when we went off the dollar standard, real estate has exploded. It's been one of the best hedges against inflation, the best ways to preserve wealth and to create cash flow. And Bitcoin now over the last decade, has become that vehicle as well. So short the dollar, go long hard assets, study real estate, study Bitcoin, build wealth, and create a future for yourself, your family, your legacy. Number 8. The 3 traits that you need for a successful entrepreneurial life: hunger, grit, and drive. If you're going to go down this path, if you decide that you want to become an entrepreneur or live a life of freedom and sovereignty, you're going to need to integrate those 3 traits and make a conscious decision to build them into your character. So make sure you work every day on developing hunger, grit, and drive. And number 9, the last but not least, habits compound. Small incremental habits affect and create large outcomes. From when you wake up in the morning and making your bed and creating like a disciplined, organized environment, to hitting the gym first, to doing 100 push-ups when you wake up, small incremental habits compound, and those will integrate into your business life. If you can do the difficult things in the morning when you wake up and have a good system and structure, you'll be able to do that in the business world, and then those small things will compound and will develop and create great outcomes and great success. So these are my top takeaways from the entrepreneurial life with Antonio Lombardo. What were you guys? Comment below. If you want to see additional content on any of these topics, from trading options to understanding Bitcoin to managing rental property to owning insurance companies, let us know what you guys want to see content around. We'll get together again and we'll do in-depth on each one of these topics if you have interest in it. So again, I'm James Danley. This is the Bulldogs Podcast. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you guys next time. Have you ever had like a real job or worked for anybody?
Do you even know what work is?
I mean, I like pulled weeds one time when I was in high school. I worked at Kinko's for a year too. I've had jobs, but not like professionally.
That's hilarious.